Okay, well, it is 2 minutes after the hour, so I want to go ahead and get started and be respectful of everybody's time. Thanks for attending today's Clinical Edge presentation on the power of peer specialists. Let's see here. So my name is Christine Garver-Apgar, and I'm the Research and Evaluation Director here at the Behavioral Health and Wellness Program at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. And to help me cover really a broad range of programs and perspectives today, I'm joined by my colleague, Derek Noland, who is a community liaison at BHWP, and also by our guest speaker, Leanne Vasquez. Leanne is a community health worker at Mental Health Partners and a volunteer at Streets Hope Volunteer. And she's also an experienced peer specialist whom Derek and I had the pleasure of working with on one of the projects that we're presenting on today. So I know you'll be interested in hearing directly from her a little bit later in the presentation. So I'd like to just go over the training objectives for today. We're going to provide a brief overview of the recovery movement and peer-driven programming. And then we're going to talk about 3 really diverse peer programs, and we'll share some evaluation outcomes from each of the programs, and also some practical guidance for implementing sustainable peer services, perhaps at your own organization. And then, of course, we're going to hear directly from Leanne on the challenges and the rewards of working with individuals who are in recovery. And then finally, before getting started, I just want to let everyone know that I don't have any conflicts of interest, financial or otherwise, and I'm pretty sure nobody else on the panel does either. So I want to spend just a few minutes talking about the recovery movement and why peer-driven programming is such an important component. So over the past decade, the concept of recovery has really gained increased traction within the healthcare industry, social service organizations, and also the justice system. So SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, defines recovery this way. They say it's a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. So organizations within these industries have evolved their focus to include recovery, resiliency, and self-management. And this approach has been successfully implemented in the treatment of a range of chronic physical and behavioral health conditions. And the shift in attention towards recovery and self-management really highlights the role that individuals play in their own recovery, as well as in the recovery journeys of their peers. Peer support specialists are individuals with lived experience of chronic physical or mental health conditions, substance use conditions, homelessness, or involvement in the criminal justice system. And because of these lived experiences, peers really possess a unique skill set that can be leveraged to connect marginalized populations with social services, resources, and healthcare. Peers are trained to use their personal recovery experiences to help guide, inspire, advocate for, and empower others who are maybe not as far along in their own recovery journey. And I just want to say here that I'll probably use the terms peers, peer specialists, or peer support specialists throughout this program, but this presentation, but I always mean sort of the definition that's listed here. So why should we hire peers? We know from the scientific literature that peer support programs are really effective. Research has demonstrated positive effects of these programs for both program participants, but also for peer specialists themselves. Peer specialists have been shown to be equally as effective as other healthcare providers at stabilizing clients, and perhaps even more effective at quickly engaging clients who are most distrustful or alienated from the healthcare system. Literature has found, research and studies have found that peer specialists are uniquely qualified to enhance several different aspects of recovery, including hope, empowerment, self-esteem, self-efficacy, social inclusion, and engagement. And they also reduce internalized stigma, and they promote empowerment and inclusion because people develop a personal identity with peers. So, this body of literature has led to the classification of peer support as an evidence-based intervention. And in turn, peer specialists also experience important benefits of pursuing, really meaningful work and making a positive impact on others. It can facilitate peers' own recovery. It can deepen their sense of resiliency and self-efficacy. And research has shown that working as a peer specialist increases the chances of continued work opportunities and financial independence. And we probably have a list of, 30 or 40 references that kind of support all of the bullet points on the slide. So I couldn't put them all up here, but if anybody does want a reference list, we can certainly provide that. So we know that individuals with overlapping vulnerabilities and risk factors have really complex needs. And we also know that these are often undermanaged and not adequately treated within systems of care that are, quite highly fragmented. Priority populations include individuals living at the intersection of homelessness or socioeconomic disadvantage, criminal justice involvement, mental health conditions, and substance use conditions. These are all demographic characteristics that tend to trigger stigma, as well as implicit bias and explicit bias from members of the community, but also from service providers sometimes. And so as a result, we know that people within these relatively more disenfranchised groups are often distrustful of healthcare and other service providers, which in turn decreases their access to services. And we know that increases disparities in health outcomes. So the effect is that people in the most vulnerable populations are the least likely to receive recovery support services through more traditional avenues like healthcare. So, if services are positioned where at risk populations are more able to access them, then any point of intervention or service can really become a hub of care and resources. And this perspective is quite well aligned with the patient centered medical neighborhood model, where a broad range of providers and patient navigators, community service providers, are really instrumental in helping to establish and ensure a more coordinated care for priority populations. And while many organizations might recognize the value and importance of incorporating peer support personnel into their teams, strategies to create effective and sustainable programs are a little bit less well known, particularly in non-traditional settings. So today, we're going to be presenting on three peer-driven programs that we, the presenters, have worked on and that have all taken place in settings that are outside of a purely medical or behavioral healthcare context. So first, the It Takes a Library project embedded peer specialists in the Denver Public Library to support existing social workers, security personnel, and other library staff, and of course the library patrons. So we'll be presenting some data from that program. The Criminal Justice Tobacco Cessation Equity Project sought to provide peer-facilitated tobacco cessation services to incarcerated individuals who are participating in a pre-release program in Arizona. And then the Collective Impact Project embedded peer specialists into a range of agencies serving individuals experiencing homelessness or who are at risk for homelessness, with the goal of providing improved prevention and management of chronic disease services. So these are the three projects we'll talk about. In each case, we'll give a little bit of background and present some data on the project. Data range from qualitative data from focus groups and key informant interviews, all the way to more quantitative data for some of the projects. All right, so the first project that I'll present on evaluated peer support specialists that had been hired by the Denver Public Library to support its most vulnerable customers. Definitely a non-traditional setting for peer facilitated services. And I want to point out that for each project we'll discuss today, I've provided a link to a corresponding playbook or a report that goes into much more detail about the project, including some recommendations for adopting similar programs than what we're ever are able to cover in this really brief sort of sampling today. And so, if you're considering adopting a peer program, I encourage you to use these resources if you're interested in learning more about any of these. Okay, so the library project, it takes a library. This project really stemmed from a need that the Denver Public Library and staff were experiencing. With increasing homelessness in Denver over the past several years and several years prior to this project, the Denver Public Library, which is located in downtown Denver, had increasingly become a safe public refuge. So librarians at DPL, and this is really the case in most major cities, are increasingly being called on to answer questions about community resources, social services, and also healthcare options. And without adequate training, they feel under-equipped to provide this information and support. And I think this quote on the right kind of captures what librarians are experiencing. A social worker said, librarians really want to help people, but when the questions are, how do I get to substance treatment? And the librarians don't have that information, it's hard. So prior to this project, there had also been an increasing number of opioid overdose fatalities in the area just around the Denver Public Library. And so there was really a need for additional social support services at the library. By the time that this project had begun, DPL had already hired 2 social workers and additional security personnel to meet this need. And then in 2017, 2 grants allowed the library to hire 4 peer specialists and also evaluate the program outcomes, which is where we came in. So the figure on the right here shows kind of the basic structure of the project at the library. Essentially, peers handle the majority of direct work with the priority population, including being present for drop-in hours when anybody can just come in to get assistance from the peer support specialists. And they also conducted outreach, so they were very visible on all the floors of the library. They would go around and approach people who seemed to be struggling. And they also did this kind of in the area right outside of the library as well. They developed relationships with people who came regularly to the library, referred customers to community resources, provided emotional support, and provided bus passes and other more basic supplies as well. And because the peer specialists provided these services, social workers at the library could maintain greater availability to handle really crisis situations, things anything involving children or, domestic violence situations or other violent situations. Social workers then could also spend time organizing and conducting staff trainings and provided supervision to the peers. And then the project personnel were also supported by staff from the Colorado Mental Wellness Network, which is a peer-run organization in Colorado focused on recovery. And then a lead social worker kind of oversaw the whole thing. So I want to speak just a little bit to all the ways that peers were professionally supported at the library. Prior to their placement, peer specialists attended an 80-hour training that was developed specifically for peer support specialists. It was developed and provided by the Colorado Mental Wellness Network. So students learn to build on their own lived experiences in order to help others. And the training topics include things like recovery, advocacy, ethics, communication skills, self-care and boundaries, resilience, trauma-informed support, a variety of topics. And then after they were hired, peers received regular ongoing training on many of these and other topics as well. And then these additional trainings were made available to the rest of the library staff too. The program was designed so that the positions were part-time. So they worked for 20 to 30 hours per week maximum. And that was to prevent burnout, but also to allow extra time for self-care. And so as you saw in the previous figure, the peers were supervised directly by the licensed clinical social workers. So the entire team would meet together weekly, and then the social workers also met individually with peers for an additional 30 minutes a week. And then in addition to that, they also were able to meet with an experienced staff member at the Colorado Mental Wellness Network for another hour of supervision. One peer described that as being sort of like a support group. So at the beginning of the program, we helped peer support specialists and social workers implement a detailed tracking system for all the types of customer contacts at the library. And we basically had two goals. We wanted to maintain the privacy and trust of the customers who are receiving the services. And we wanted to collect adequate information to facilitate tracking the volume of contacts and also the breadth of the customer needs that were being addressed through the project. So we really spent several months developing and sort of fine-tuning a system of data collection that would generate useful information for stakeholders, but that would also sort of minimize the burden on social workers and the peer specialists. And one thing I'll mention about our tracking process for this particular study is that over the course of the project, the quality of the data being collected from library customers improved quite noticeably over time. And we think that that's possibly because peers and social workers became more familiar with the information that was being collected, but it also might be because library customers became increasingly trusting of the staff over time. And that made it more likely that they would feel comfortable divulging personal information. So once we kind of had this going, we looked over an 11-month period, and peers and social workers made nearly 3,000 contacts with customers in the target population. About 70% of these provided enough information for us to determine whether they were folks who just showed up a single time for some assistance, or whether they were repeat customers, meaning they came to the library more regularly. We estimate that about 1,600 unique individuals were served during this evaluation period. And although they comprised only 28% of the sample, the repeat customers accounted for 60% of all contacts with peers and social workers working in this program. And then the figure on the right is perhaps a little bit hard for you to read, but it basically shows a breakdown of the most frequent services that were provided by peer specialists and social workers. So generally, providing resources for individuals experiencing homelessness and offering housing support together made up, more than 40% of all the services that were provided. And then providing support and referrals for physical and behavioral health services, including substance use treatment, and that accounted for another just about 30% of all the services provided. And I also want to mention just some of the impacts that the project had on the library staff, the library as a whole, and also the surrounding community. So first, changing library dynamics. Together, the social work and the peer support specialist programs at the library have really sort of catalyzed a deliberate shift in the library's culture of community. And I think this quote from the security manager several years before that he was hired reflects the fact that even before the peer specialists were hired, that the library security and staff and social workers were already working to change the dynamics. So what he said is, it was kind of like the Wild West. We were handcuffing people 4 or 5 times per week. We set out to change a culture. And they really did. The presence of the peer support specialists and social workers at the library has really propelled a shift in dynamics because now individuals in the target population, they really value the services that are provided by the peers. And that appreciation encourages people to follow the rules of the library so that they can return and stay for longer periods of time and access the services and the resources, as well as the physical safety of the library. Now, the security personnel are trained to give social workers and peers latitude and space to create relationships and to de escalate situations before getting involved themselves. And staff are reporting that they now see fewer behavioral incidents, and there are now fewer incidents requiring security involvement. Second, increasing staff capacity. So, the social work and the peer support specialist programs have really given library staff an invaluable referral resource. Every department of the library benefits. And as an example, in the Community Technology Center, people often need assistance not just with the technology itself, but with the content of what they're working on. So if they're filing a police report or if they're applying for food assistance. And helping individuals at this level goes beyond the skill sets of a lot of the staff who are trained in the technology. So the Technology Center staff now refer customers to the peers for help with the content of what they're working on. And that has reduced frustration on the part of the customers, and it allows the technology staff to focus on helping individuals develop their technology skills. So the technology manager at DPL said, the level of work we're able to do here is so much higher compared to other libraries that don't have this resource because we do have this resource. Oops, I forgot one, hold on. Okay. I need to go back. Okay. And then lastly, the peers model recovery for the customers they work with directly, but the presence of peer specialists serves as a reminder for the rest of the staff that recovery really is possible and that people who are in challenging circumstances can and actually do get better. And in that way, the program has helped to combat some of the compassion fatigue of library staff who otherwise might lose hope. Staff are really grateful for the opportunity to witness the connections that are formed between the peers and the benefits of those connections. And then some departments, like the technology department, even has staff members shadow the peers to learn how to de-escalate situations. So one social worker said, the peers role model for the rest of the staff that it's okay to get to know somebody, to humanize people, and that's huge. Okay. So the next program that I'll talk about is the Criminal Justice Tobacco Cessation Equity Project. This project, implemented with partnership from the Department of Corrections in Arizona, was funded by the Arizona Department of Health and Human Services. And the link I've provided here will take you to a more detailed evaluation report of the work that I'll present on today. But you should know that this is really one part of a whole series of efforts and funded initiatives to increase cessation services within the justice-involved population in Arizona. And so you can find more information about those additional efforts on our website if you're interested as well. Whoops, now I'm going the wrong way again. Okay, so we know that in the US, the smoking rate among incarcerated men and women is about 3 times higher than in the general population. And yet we know, and research shows, that most individuals who are incarcerated and use tobacco do have a desire to quit. And they can quit when they're offered robust treatment options. So today I'll be sharing results from a pilot project aimed at providing peer-facilitated cessation services to incarcerated individuals who were participating in a pre-release program in Arizona. The cessation program was implemented at the Eagle Point Second Chance Center. This pre-release program provides skills and resources to selected inmates who have only 12 weeks remaining on their sentence. The cessation program that we evaluated is called Dimensions. It's a flexible evidence-based program, and in this case, it's tailored specifically for a justice-involved population. The program includes a complete curriculum to run a 6-session group. And for this project, inmates from the pre-release program that we partnered with who had been selected to teach classes to their peers were trained in the Dimensions group curriculum. So these peer educators were really a natural fit for this work. The program is also a train the trainer model so that when folks complete the training, the trainees have the knowledge and materials to then train other individuals to become program facilitators at their organization. So the group is designed that through wellness education, group discussion, and activities, group facilitators teach participants strategies for stress management and behavior change. And the group also provides participants a supportive environment. I'm going to be reporting data from 3 groups that were run in early 2020. And nicotine replacement therapy was also provided to participants by the Arizona Department of Health Services to all the group participants, starting in the 4th session. And I wanted to mention that almost everyone chose to use the NRT that was available to them. So to track outcomes over time, participants completed a personal progress form at every session. The data I'll share today is all from this single form. It's all self-report, and I don't want to go over it in detail, but I just wanted to provide it on the slide deck for those of you who might want to return to the recording and review it more carefully. Okay, so how did people do? We had a total of 37 men participate in one of the 3 groups. Almost everyone reported smoking cigarettes. A third reported using chew as well. And out of these 37 people, 9 people reported having quit their tobacco use by the end of the 6-week group. That reflects a 24% quit rate. And we counted an individual as having quit if they reported no tobacco or nicotine use in the preceding 7 days. And of the individuals who quit, none reported relapsing before the end of the group, although I should note we don't have any data beyond that point. And of course, not everyone actually quits during the group, so we wanted to know whether the group had an impact on the amount of tobacco and nicotine people reported using. And we looked across the group sessions to see if the frequency of tobacco use decreased over time. And we found that it did. So the orange bars you're looking at here indicate the percentage of folks endorsing the different frequencies of tobacco use during session 1. So at session 1, the median reported tobacco use was 11 to 20 cigarettes. The green bars show the percentage of folks endorsing the different categories during session 6. So by session 6, the median reported tobacco use had decreased down to 1 to 5 cigarettes per day. And that shows a significant reduction in tobacco use. And then we also looked at whether attending fewer tobacco-free group sessions would yield similar reductions. And we found that for this sample, attending only 2 sessions was actually enough to significantly reduce tobacco use prior to the 3rd session. And finally, we wanted to look at whether participants reported a positive shift in their readiness to live a tobacco-free life post-release over the course of the group participation. So we compared participants' responses to 5 items across the group sessions. Items were, I plan to take steps toward living a tobacco-free life. I have the knowledge I need to live a tobacco-free life after release. I'm confident in my ability, and I know I will have the support I need to live a tobacco-free life. Once again, the orange arrows show where the participants were on average on this 0 to 10 scale at session 1, and then the green arrows show where they had moved to on average by session 6. So the results here again are based on 31 people who did complete all 6 sessions. And you can see positive movement along the scales for most of these items, except for the motivation item. And that's actually just because everyone in the program came into the session already very, very motivated. And now I'm going to turn this over to Derek, who is going to discuss our last project, the Collective Impact Project.
Thank you very much, Christine. Yes, hi everyone. So again, my name is Derek Noland, and I'm a community liaison here at the Behavioral Health and Wellness Program. I had the privilege of being the grant manager for the Collective Impact Project. It was a really fulfilling, enjoyable project. For anyone who's interested in learning more information than I'll be able to cover today, I invite you to please visit our website, and that link that you see there can be downloaded for free for review. So the Collective Impact Project was a 3-year grant that was funded by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. It ran from the middle of 2015 to 2018. And we did have 1 year provided at the beginning of the project within those 3 years as kind of a planning and a trial period, which really was very helpful to be as conscientious as possible in setting this up in a really thoughtful and successful manner. One of the things that we did at the outset was to create a coalition of community stakeholders. So this coalition involved a number of different parties and organizations. Working closely with us in a more partner type role was Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, which really helped us with the to provide the housing specialist lens for this project. So they helped a great deal in that respect, because as Christine mentioned in the beginning, um, this project was designed to help people who were homeless or facing homelessness, as well as to screen them for chronic diseases. We also worked closely with the Colorado Mental Wellness Network for this project too. They really supported a lot of our peer training initiatives, as well as direct support with the peers. They're also very instrumental in recruitment of peers for the project. We also had a variety of different stakeholders within the community that helped us set the agenda for the project to narrow in our focus and our plan. We had a number of different organizations. We also had healthcare specialists, housing specialists, volunteers, a lot of different people supported this. So the coalition also was charged with overseeing trainings and meetings. We did provide regular training for the peer navigators. We also had a peer liaison who was a bridge between myself really and the peers and the peer sites, who really was instrumental in providing some direct um, care and work with the peers, and also keeping me in the loop. So this was a very important role as well. The trainings that we provided were both job skills as well as some self-care techniques, such as wellness recovery action plans and things of that nature. So we engaged some community sites in order to place the peer navigators, a few different sites, one being a primary healthcare provider where actually Leanne was placed. And we also did some work with kind of a community service hub and also some outreach centers that help provide shelter and other services. So we had a different mix of sites. The peer navigators had a very important role in this project, obviously. We placed them under site supervisors who were kind of in charge of the direct oversight their within their role, and they set that role and explained it to other staff members, educated other staff members about what the role entailed and what it did not. And this was very important to have that guidance set, so that it was very clear what their role would be. The coalition helped to identify 4 key peer navigator job activities, ways in which they could help their clients, really. One of them was education, primarily educating clients about the different chronic diseases that we were focused on. Importantly, they were role models. The peer navigators, being far along in their recovery, were symbols of inspiration and hope to the clients that they served, and that really was one of the key pieces that led to the success of this project. Peers were also advocates for their clients, both within their organizations and within the community, really helping to vocalize issues that clients were facing. And finally, peers were very instrumental in services navigation. So, not only routing to people to appropriate healthcare services when possible, but also letting them know about different services that were available within the community for certain needs. Our peers screened our clients for 4 key chronic diseases. They were cancer, diabetes, heart disease, COPD, and emphysema. And so, as I mentioned, there was training around some signs and symptoms of these diseases and things of that nature that would help to make those assessments and to refer them for further review. Clients were also screened to assess their housing status. We used a standardized tool for that, and that was one of the things that MDHI helped us with. And so some people were able to gain housing through the project, though that was not one of the outcomes that we tracked. We did, however, track a lot of really positive outcomes from this project, and you can see our project playbook that I mentioned at the beginning on the right there. The PNs were extremely effective at serving their clients, and we had a great amount of reach over the 2 years of the project, two plus. There was a little bit during that first year. Overall, we supported 1,071 clients. So those are people who are directly engaged with our peer navigators. And of those, we can say that at least 823 people were screened for those four chronic diseases. And furthermore, 429 of those individuals were referred to healthcare services in order to get further help. And a lot of those people were in the location where Leanne was based, where we did have that primary care option, which helped in that regard. Um, Ultimately, the sites and the peer navigators really demonstrated the value of peer-based work. This was not something that we were able to evaluate in a quantitative sense, but multiple peers were able to continue in this field at the end of the project. Some of them even, the sites were able to find ways to keep them on board after the project funding ended. So between that and all the different client contacts and all the great feedback that we got, we really feel confident that this was a very successful project and really demonstrated the efficacy of peer navigator or peer specialist work. Just to provide a little bit more in the way of closing thoughts, we learned a lot through this project, and I would again point you to the playbook for further information on these points. But one of the key points is really that organizational readiness is critical. We really, in order for peers to thrive in a workplace, we really want their direct supervisors and really the entire staff that they interact with to understand what the peer role is, what their scope and focus will be within that system, and to make sure that it stays within that scope so that they are effective and not stretched too thin. Um, Peer roles to further this should be clearly outlined and understood by all. I would say that our site supervisors were very, very good, good at supporting their peers and creating, good space for them to work. And having a peer liaison was really helpful in this process. That individual really did a good job of bridging the gap between myself and the peer navigators. Another lesson is that structured, intensive onboarding really is critical. A lot of upfront training really does help, and having everything in place ahead of time just made everything go much more smoothly when we did begin the work. Another important lesson is that peers really do need to be closely vetted before beginning. Unfortunately, turnover does occur, and this did occur in the project. We did have some peers that ultimately left their positions. A lot of that was due to burnout. Part of it was also that peers really do need to be further along in their own recovery. The nature of the work really can be triggering. It's very stressful work at times, really wanting to help your clients, sometimes wanting to go above and beyond. So finding the right individuals who are far along in their recovery and who are good at managing boundaries and individuals really is important. Um, all that being said, peers who meet this criteria and properly identified really can be invaluable and quite unique team members. It's a real great service to be able to have in an environment because, as Christine mentioned, um, peers are able to connect to clients who otherwise simply may leave without getting service or may just not engage at the same level. So it's truly an important project. And with that overview, I'd like to turn it over to Leanne Vasquez, who again was one of our peer navigators in this project and who was with us throughout the project and really was a leader in the peer navigator world and really went above and beyond in her work. So with that, I'm happy to introduce Leanne.
Hello, I'm Leanne Vasquez. I am a community health worker with Mental Health Partners, and I work at Streets Hope Volun Todd part-time. So let's talk about the challenges of peer work. So for me, learning to set, use, and example boundaries is a critical element for effective personal growth and professional regifting. And I say regifting because, you know, peers gain from professional avenues to better and recover their lives, and then we're able to regift that in the end. And so a persistent promotion of self-care and with either clinical support and or peer-led. Next. Rewards of peer work. It's the gift that keeps giving. So there is nothing greater in my life now than to be gifted with the ability and life experiences to give back and celebrate others' strengths. So when giving the time, heart, and empathy to others and having the awareness of those creating their own growth, it feels like nature's mother is doing its thing. And there are so many opportunities that manifest for peers through personal and professional development. And like, you know, the trainings, the skills and education, it's invaluable. Next. So the peer work takeaways, as you can see, clearly established peer role and offer structured support is so important. And for effective peer work, it's really important to build rapport, earn trust, and offer intentional listening, which meets people where they are and aids in the celebration of individual successes. So, you know, peer work is so important for me. It's my jam, and it's just important that I'm in a place in my life now in recovery and education and lived experiences that I can give back to others. And what I find is that people, you know, when they meet with me, they have a passion to give back in return as well. So they want to build on their recovery and give back too. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Leanne. I am going to share my screen again. And then, let's see here. Okay, and then I'll just advance a few slides. That was wonderful hearing from Leanne's perspectives on the work. And now in the last section of today's presentation, what I would like to do is to try to distill some key recommendations for building a sustainable peer-driven service. So first, I would suggest, and I think everybody here would suggest, that allowing time to train healthcare and social service providers on peer-led services, and also what recovery means, what are recovery-oriented perspectives, is really important. So in the library project, for example, The process of educating the staff about the role of a peer specialist has taken a lot of time. Key staff members at the library reported, having heard sentiments from librarians to the effect of, "I'm a librarian, I'm not a social worker," prior to implementing their peer programs. So when the pilot program first began, library staff really needed training on how to utilize peer specialists appropriately. And peers helped with this by making sure they were consistently visible on the floors of the library. They demonstrated for other staff members when they were the best qualified and when other departments or personnel might be better suited for a particular situation. Since the program began, library staff have grown accustomed to the presence of peers. They've learned more about their roles and when it is and isn't appropriate to refer a customer to a peer specialist. And today, the vast majority of staff are highly supportive of the program. They often comment that the program should be expanded. So in general, ensuring that staff members of the organizations are on board with having peers is really well worth the effort. Second, establish a culture of data at the organizations you're working at. Evaluation does not have to be onerous or time-consuming. Continuous evaluation allows stakeholders to monitor progress and to advocate for what programs need. So for example, in the case of the Arizona project, NRT was needed, and people in the program reported how they felt that NRT was one of the most critical aspects of their success with cessation. And that was something that if data weren't collected on that, then you wouldn't have the tools to advocate to the health department, perhaps, that NRT is really necessary for the program. In the case of the Denver Public Library, more peer specialists were needed. So it's often difficult to know what's working well and what isn't working well when the evaluation isn't happening. And of course, you want to get credit and more funding for all the good work you're doing. So it's really important to give thought to the evaluation process and to do it before the project begins, and to think about what outcomes could you measure that would indicate a successful program. What does success look like? Have those discussions and try to figure out for all the stakeholders what it is that would indicate success. And then how can you realistically integrate a culture of data into the organizations that you're working with in a way that's not too burdensome or onerous. Third, implement flexible programs and workflows if possible. So all three of the programs that we talked about today really benefited from a flexible approach, whether that was flexibility in the program being implemented, flexibility in how workflows were established, or flexibility in the nature of the data that could realistically be collected. For the Arizona program, using a really flexible tobacco cessation program allowed peers to make modifications that they thought would best serve their own participants. And so in their case, they instituted a group quit date, which the program didn't originally have in it, but in this particular circumstance for incarcerated individuals, they found that to be very helpful. They also ran the group two different ways. For a couple of groups, they ran it 2 times a week for 3 weeks. And then in another group, it just worked better to run it once a week for 6 weeks. And so having this flexibility was really important in this particular setting. Sometimes having peer specialists do the work itself leads to additional flexibility. So again, in the case of Arizona, having the peer facilitators run the groups alleviated some of the logistical challenges associated with having an outside facilitator. So for example, the groups that I presented on today ran over the holidays. They ran, there was a group that was run both on December 23rd and also December 27th. This continuity was necessary in a prison setting, but it could have been difficult to maintain if outside facilitators had been running the groups. They might not have wanted to come in on those days. In the Collective Impact Project, the talked about, some of the community organizations, as he mentioned, we partnered with were primary care organizations, while others were social service organizations that focused more on supporting individuals experiencing homelessness. So the workflows around identifying participants who were appropriate for the project, folks who had both chronic disease symptoms or diagnoses and who were experiencing homelessness, that really depended on the type of agency we were working with. In the case of primary care, they know who has a chronic disease symptom, and it's more a matter of identifying who might be experiencing homelessness. But in the case of the homelessness focused agencies, their folks are coming in for support with housing or homelessness. And so figuring out who might be experiencing symptoms of chronic disease was more the goal. So just knowing that a given process or workflow will work in one agency, knowing that it might not work in another, and being flexible about how our workflows are implemented. And then fourth, plan a professionally supportive infrastructure. I can't emphasize the importance of this one enough for peer-driven programs. And we've talked today about a variety of ways that peers were supported during the projects that we presented. Robust training, continuing education, intensive supervision, having other peers and professionals that peers can connect with, and continued professional development. And then also, of course, leaving time for self-care are all really important ways to support peer specialists. And then lastly, strive to create permanently funded peer positions or other pathways to permanent employment. So, for example, most of their time at the Denver Public Library, the peers were highly concerned about future availability of funding for their positions, in part due to the loss of one source of grant funding during the project. For peers with a lived experience of homelessness, job security is, of vital importance. So concerns over funding can be a significant barrier to the occupational well-being for many peer support specialists. And it can be difficult retaining peers in that situation. So in the case of the library project, social workers at the library developed a presentation for the mayor's chief of staff and budget office. And that led to a successful bid to create city-funded positions for 6 peer support specialists at DPL at 30 hours per week. So that was a huge success of that project. And in the closing months of the Collective Impact Project, the coalition focused a lot of efforts on professional development for peers, with a special emphasis on resume building, interviewing, and job searching. And as Derek and of course Leanne have indicated, many of the peer specialists who worked on that project were able to find employment afterward in the area. So lastly, I want to put up this last resource for you. This is a peer support program toolkit. So it's a nice resource. It gives all kinds of information about building a peer program, why peers are important, and all kinds of practical guidance. So if you're interested in doing it, I recommend this resource. And then lastly, we have a few minutes left to hold a question and answer session. So you can either type your question in the chat box or in the question and answer box, or I don't think we have so many people that we can't just, well, I'm not sure if we can have you come off of mute and just ask yourselves, but you could give that a try. And
Yes.
Sorry, Derek, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if anyone does want to ask a question, we could use the raise hand feature. You could click on that if you want. And we do have a question in the chat box, but I'm sorry, Christine, you had something else you were saying.
No, the last thing I was going to say is, while we're doing a question and answer session here, please feel free to ask questions of any one of us. And before you leave the presentation, Derek is going to paste an evaluation into the chat box. We ask that you please complete this evaluation. It gives us a lot of good knowledge about these presentations and what people are wondering about. And so I encourage you, it only takes a couple of minutes, but please click the link that Derek is going to paste in the chat box and take that before you leave today. So let's see, with that.
Okay, we did have one question earlier from Allison, and I just posted that evaluation link for everyone to please evaluate our webinar. Allison asked a little bit earlier, for the first and last programs, how is peer defined? How is recovery defined for the last group, as it sounds like that was evaluated prior to onboarding? I'll say for the collective impact project, really peer in a lot of cases really is a self-defined term. Generally speaking, in this project, these were individuals that either had some sort of behavioral health condition prior to the project, and perhaps that was still ongoing, and or given this project, perhaps experience with homelessness. In terms of recovery, yes, it was evaluated prior to onboarding, and that really was something that we relied heavily on the Colorado Mental Wellness Network to help us with that recruitment and recommendation process. So I hope that answers the question.
Derek, I don't actually see the evaluation posted in the chat box. I'm not sure if others do.
Oh, apologies. I sent that directly to one individual. Now the link is there.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, Derek. Are there, let's see.
We have a question about whether or not we'll be sending out the slides to registered participants. I believe our plan really is to actually post this this webinar on our YouTube channel, so it would be available that way. If anyone wants to reach out for further resources, please contact the Behavioral Health and Wellness Program.
And Allison is asking, are you aware of how a potential employer can circulate an opportunity for peer recovery specialist? So do you mean, I'm guessing you mean if an employer wants to hire a peer, or how do they go about doing that? What are some sources for good peer specialists? So I'll just say in the library project, that 80-hour training that I described earlier, people were essentially hired out of that training group. So there was a large number of trainees, and that served as actually a really nice recruitment pool then for the library to hire from. So I guess my answer is trying to partner, being strategic about partnerships, and reaching out to organizations in the area that might be a source of peer support. So in Colorado, we're lucky because we have the Colorado Mental Wellness Network. So I would recommend reaching out to some of those organizations. Derek, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
No, I think that was a good answer. I did want to clarify my previous point. Amy, who works with us as well, has stated that we will post the slides and an archive video on our website, and we'll send an email when that is ready. Any other questions in the time that we have in our last minute or two here?
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for participating today and for coming to this Clinical Edge presentation. I hope you took something from it that you can use in your own organization. And if you have any questions later, please feel free to reach out, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Please fill out the evaluation link before you leave. Thanks so much.